So I have this malware sample used by a Pakistani Advanced Persistent Threat, or APT. In this video, we can go ahead and play with it. So first things first, let's just fire it up and see it in action. So I'll double click on this .xlam file. This is a Microsoft Excel add-in, and hey, it's gonna need me to, have an account, but I don't. And it's gonna ask me, hey, do you want to enable macros for this document? The summer collection outfits.xlam. And this is the trigger for the malware. So I'm gonna go ahead and enable macros to let this run. You should never do that, by the way, not in an actual environment. I am inside of a virtual machine, and you can see something weird going on. A copy dialog opened up. We'll ignore our sign in for Office, but with that, we'll see this open up to Delhi fashion. I am inside of a Windows 10 virtual machine. I'm using Windows 10 just because that's where I had an offline version of Office installed, so it was just a matter of convenience, but the network adapter is removed, and I'm not worried about this thing actually, infecting the VM. If it does, for whatever reason, I can just roll back to a different snapshot. And by the way, of course, antivirus like Windows Defender would nuke this from orbit, so I do have real-time protection, cloud delivery protection, all this stuff. I do have Defender turned off to showcase. Now, there's not much more in the document, but it's interesting. I do have two renditions of Excel open, and we saw some oddities as this thing got started. There's nothing else in the document other than this Delhi fashion, hey, pictures of this person modeling, all for Envy Designs, I guess. But it being with malicious macros, we could explore the macros. Moving up to the View menu here on the bar, we should be able to explore the macros, but there aren't any. I apparently need to have an online account and be signed into that to be able to view those, so that's annoying. But you know what? That is okay, because we can see and explore the macros with a little bit of a different method and really start our analysis. We can do some static analysis in another virtual machine. In this case, I'm using Flare, and I do have the sample here for our summer collection outfits. And let's open up the commander for a little command line and terminal here. I'll move into my desktop where I do have that present there, and I'll use the tools OLE VBA. That's from OLE Tools, big shout out Decalage. Let me run this on our summer collection, and okay, it carved out a good amount here. I'll zoom out. And this is some interesting stuff. It will, hey, highlight, sort of zoom in on and specify, hey, we found these interesting entries here, some suspicious different types of keywords or descriptions, but ultimately, we would like to see the source that it does show right up here. We've got xlvbaproject.bin and an OLE stream for the specific workbook. Here is all that syntax. Scrolling up, it looks like we have a lot more code to explore over in this. What is this one called? There's a bit here. Okay, VBA.project.bin and just the module one. So it ultimately maybe have this code that it could execute, and we can carve it out. I'm gonna move this into Remnux, the reverse engineering Linux distribution, just so, hey, there's really no chance that that code will ever execute in one way or another. Let me open up just a text editor. Hey, before we get too far down the rabbit hole, please allow me to fulfill a contractual obligation and tell you about the sponsor of today's video, Sneak. Do you ever feel like you need to complete a million tasks at once while the security of your application is resting on your shoulders? That's where our sponsor, Sneak, comes in. Sneak is your inside helper in the world of application security. With Sneak, you can find and fix vulnerabilities in your code in real time and get the security intelligence and remediation advice that you need without disrupting the development workflow. So get peace of mind with Sneak and sign up for a free account today using my link below, jh.live/sneak. Huge thanks to Sneak for sponsoring this video. And now I've copied all of the Visual Basic application VBA code into Sublime Text so I could work with it. And I don't believe that Sublime Text actually has a Visual Basic script or VBA added as some syntax highlighting. So let me install a package, and VBScript should work just fine. Once that is set up, we can set our syntax to VBScript, and then we have a little bit more color. Okay, so we define a variable, I column as Boolean, in which case we are testing that in each of the subroutines if it is false. And then if it is, it's setting it to true, but it never actually sets the value to begin with, which means it's probably going to be false to start. You can think of that as uninitialized data, likely just going to be 0 or false. And each of these subroutines, workbook activate, workbook open, workbook sheet calculate. Oh, maybe that's just, hey, some actual functions or formulas, methods, math being called there. But ultimately, these would run automatically, just as the document is opened. So this condition here, we don't really care about. We know that'll end up executing anyway, and that I column value does not do anything otherwise after the fact. So each of these just ultimately call another function, and there's nothing else all that interesting here. That function, call or the subroutine, smooth the roll through, that actually lives in the module 1.vba. So we'll open that up. Let me get this set with the Visual Basic script color, syntax highlighting again, and this is the function of the subroutine that is called. We can just rename this as to be like actually executed function, or subroutine, again, whatever you want to call it. And it has a handful of variables declared. I see path, file in the mix, that maybe should have been input, I don't know. Folder, tear, final, folder name. So it looks like there's a fragment of the variable names that actually makes sense, and there's just must Cthulhu true in the middle of it. We could probably just get rid of all those and maybe see if this is a bit easier to read. That is over and over and over again, but I do want to catch these ones in the IPUT and some of the others as well. So let me not include the underscore, and let's just find and replace that to make it go away. Now we have path file, IPUT, folder, tear, final, and a couple of these oddball ones. But again, this is all the declaration. What we see down here is it actually defining it and setting it to a value. PDSP is set to the shell application object. So again, I'll hit Control H on my keyboard to find and replace, and that's just kind of the strategy thus far to make some sense of this. Call that the shell application. And zooming out to see a couple of the others here, folder tear zip is actually going to get the environment variable for our user profile and then our local app data directory. That's normally a hidden file, and normally you see cache data, configuration stuff for different applications there. They do the same thing for our documents, so you know what? We can just call these app data path. The other one can be our documents path, and then the folder name ends up being, oh, something actually related to time. So you can see the trailing backslash here, likely indicating that this is meant to be a directory. And that's going in app data based off the time. So we'll call that timed app data directory. That's fine. Then we have a file name for Darmskar that. Just call that file name. And then the file tear zip should actually be having that and adding on what would be a zip extension after the underscore here is replaced out of zip with an underscore in the middle. Same thing for PNG. We'll call that zip file name, the other one with PNG file name. And then the folder final file is our documents path, and the file name, given Darmskar, actually replacing, SCR for a screensaver file, which is a Windows executable, bear in mind. That is a portable executable that you could actually invoke and it'll run code. Let's actually call that SCR file path, since that's the full path, and it is going to end up removing the SCR underscores to make sure that it has a file extension .scr. We then have an if statement to check if a dir directory here, our timed app data directory, if that is empty string, then it will create the directory. So presumably just making that if it doesn't already exist, right? Then we see a couple other objects being put together. We have the file system object and then another file system object. We can clean that up just a little bit, but then ultimately we get the workbook's name, which is interesting because if we were to actually go back to our Windows 10 virtual machine where we actually detonated this thing, we had the original sample here, summer collection outputs.xlam. Actually taking a look at the properties here, you can see that this is just that. But when we actually explored this in Excel, there were two windows, this one being our original, this file that seemingly didn't have any content whatsoever, and then the other that was the Delhi fashion. So what we see in the code here, if we actually had our this workbook name pulled out, rename this to original workbook name, the folder zip file takes our timed app data directory, adding in, concatenating with the ampersand in Visual Basic script, the original workbook name, and then the .zip file extension here. It then checks if that exists, being a directory. If it doesn't, it actually uses the file system object to copy the file of this workbook.fullname to that location. and then shell application.namespace of our timed app data directory. It will end up copying there the namespace of that and all the items inside of the zip file. So it's literally copying itself, right, into that location, making sure that it's all present there. But because all Word documents and Excel or Office documents like this are zip files, or it's like extracting it out. I think it might be because this segment down below, if the SCR file path does not exist, then it'll check, oh, even the operating system, that's neat. If the application.operating system includes 10.0, then we do something, given a function here, with our timed app data replacing out, the underscores from XL embeddings OLE object 11.bin. Same thing for OLE object. You can see .07 in here, you can see version 10 in here, so those are just embedded objects in the document. Interesting. All being stored and saved to IPut as a variable depending on the operating system, and then a RUT, which I think we saw up top here was a bytes array. The parentheses make me think there's going to be multiple there. It is just defined as a byte. Okay, but this is actually a function call, decabav6f of that. Subroutine, again, call it whatever you want, Visual Basic script. Clean this up. File system object again file being defined as file system object again. That's what I renamed a variable, so we probably got a little bit out of whack with our find and replace. We create a text file given the app data path and the zip file name. We write actual bervterving that based off of what we pull out of these files. Oh, so each of these must be the payload depending on the operating system here, depending on the version. So ultimately, whatever we're going to end up seeing next from these embedded files is probably going to be what it actually fires off, right? And that's why we saw a copy action being performed when we ran this ourselves, because it was literally copying some contents here. But this is neat because it writes that, closes it, deinitializes those objects, uses the shell application to copy things there, and then renames the PNG file as the SRF file. So there's not really a PNG file, it's actually the screensaver file, which is an executable. And then we call shell, so we actually invoke it given the name. Yep, it will fire off that payload that's included there. And then we actually get the downloads folder and the original workbook name replacing, it's actually concatenating on .xlsx, removing underscore PS. That's just some extra fluff there. That's why we saw our file name with the .xlsx file extension added onto it, right? Yeah. Look back up at the top here. .xlam, .xlsx. And same thing with the other rendition that is actually opened. So it made some changes, and we're no longer looking at this payload that we saw on our desktop. We're looking at something in like our documents and our app data and whatever it sort of staged and faked. Can I go into downloads? It's supposed to put it there, right? It did! Yeah! Interesting timestamp. That's obviously not today. So that's probably going to be when it was originally created, and you can see the preview pulling it up. So that must be a decoy. Or a fake. Authors RRU, less saved by rows. Wow. And then there's one in app data, right? Let's go to that location. They put it in data randomness based off the seconds. Yeah, time based. And this is all the extracted content from it as a zip file. That's bonkers. So XL and these contents here are where the real potential malware is, right? Based off these OLE objects that were embedded and included in the file. They're all different renditions of payloads. You can see 319 kilobytes for each of these 7, 10, or 11 bin files. 5, whoa, 7 like meg. Did we see that in the code? Did we have a 5.bin? No, that's never referenced. Interesting. Okay, anyway, it does ultimately open something that it stores in our downloads, which is the decoy, which is the deceptive, a new workbook to fool you and not realize that malware had executed. Well, it did extract some other shenanigans in the background. So this subroutine, our actually executed function, is probably good for our own understanding here. But these other methods that were called, we saw, what was it? This on all of the actual contents. Oh, this was the one, revd bnd file. So what does that do? opens the file and just reads it and then returns the contents of the file. Okay? Easy enough. Read file contents, that's a fine name. So it does that for each of the possible payloads, and then this deca-bav6f is probably going to be, base 64 decoding, right? You can see, hey, here's an object in Visual Basic script to be able to do that process. Do base 64. Okay. So let's say base 64 something. There's no clear like decode call in there from what I can tell, but I think the XML object will just naturally let it happen. Because the other function that we see here, bervturving, that is simply concatenating all of these together. So there is a full payload there, which means that one of these files, whatever one happens to execute because the operating system version number that is in there, are XL embedding and whatever we could choose, object 11, object 7, object 10, one of those is going to be the next payload. So honestly, what we could do, if I can minimize this, let me open up a terminal to get over to the malware APT directory where we have all of this. There's our original file here. We could use 7-zip to extract it, because again, it is a zip file, right? Maybe unzip would work fine. Yeah, honestly, either of the two. I think I just can't tab complete these, so let me copy paste this. Oh no, still doesn't like that either. Okay, we probably just need to change the file extension then. So let's just say sample.zip, knowing that it is a document. Yeah, let's use 7-zip to extract it. I can never trust unzip the way that it should. Ooh, actually whined about the object 5, but that's fine. We didn't see that in action here. But XL embeddings, OLE object 7, and all this stuff, that is where we see some oddities. What happens if I sublime text and open the whole directory? Let me open up this, obviously content types.xml. These are all kind of boilerplate things, stuff that is just natural with any usual Office document. Interesting though, the creator is noted as Windows user. Can you see that up there? Last modified. I don't know if that's a default or if that's just what it was set at when they created a thing. When we get down to object 7 though, look at this. That is totally base 64. Let me turn word wrap on, and that is a disaster. Same thing with 10. Yep, base 64. Same thing with 11, base 64. All the same format and structure, or at least the very start. So let's look at any of these. We can choose like OLE object 7, and we can base 64 decode that, right? Can I base 64 tac D to decode? Let's paste in object 7 bin, and we see some odd stuff there. There's our Darmscar PNG. Okay, let's redirect that out to something, and then let's see what that something is. It's a zip archive. So move something to our inner payload.zip. Let's use 7-zip to extract that once again. And now we have our Darmscar rmagv.png, which is 28 megs. And remember, that is not a PNG file. It is a .scr file or a screensaver file, which is an executable. And in this case, actually pretty convenient for us, it's a mono.NET assembly. So that means we can take a look at the bytecode, maybe, hey, sudo decompile it and read it in tools like dnspy or ilspy or .peek really easily. I do like to do that on Windows as usual to match the operating system, so let me bring that into our Flare virtual machine. Question is, can I just unzip what would have been the original macro here? I can, cool. Let me base 64 decode that here just as well. Unzip the sample, so now we have that image, and that is not an image, so we can move it to like assembly.exe. How about that? Okay, now I'm gonna, wait a second, is that the game, like Xbox icon? What does that have to do with fashion? Let me fire up .peek, and let's see if we can crack this thing open. Okay, with that, we'll just simply open up the executable, assembly.exe, Darmscar, that thing. Now, when we get to drill down into this, there's not a whole lot of metadata, references, or resources that we'll probably care about. Is that fair to say? Yeah, nothing specific, nothing out of the ordinary. I do want to dig into the code, though. If I actually expand this out, ooh. So program would execute first, right? Can I double click on that to decompile? Okay, it's using Windows Forms, which is interesting. Opens up form 1. So form 1 would be the next thing ran. Let me make this text a little bit bigger for us. This creates the form with a couple other objects that we saw here. Mid Fagum and Idigawi. Super cool. That'll invoke first, that'll invoke second, so let's keep that in mind, and then this will show in taskbar false. Sleep for a bit of time. Okay, hang on, wait. Be patient for your malware payload to invoke. Other functions and methods down below, vidudium, super cool. That does some strange stuff with a file that I wouldn't expect to exist on an actual payload. It's trying to read it and then add columns to the table, but I'm not, at least just cursory looking at this stuff, positive where that would all be or why you would do that. Is this running on the host that we tested this on? Like, should I be able to go see a .png or .scr file firing off? Let me go look. That VM just decided to like die. Okay, yeah, let's restart that thing. While that's spinning up, let me keep cruising because our main VP object from our mid stuff here is probably a little bit interesting. What do you do? Ooh, using system net sockets and probably gonna end up communicating some way somehow. We could slap this in another online sandbox or just run this with some other tools like Procmon or TCPview as things are running so we could at least watch it. But we have other objects defined here that have their custom class implementation there, network stream and all this stuff. Interesting Cora eart that we did see running would pull from the port. Is this the configuration? And then this could be actual communication. So it's a timer callback, so something's gonna execute every now and again. We end up using this REMA emount. Okay, so that is totally capability. And this is lightly obfuscated, right? There is nonsense here, but presumably this is a protocol for it to be able to hide some of the data that it pulls back and forth. I don't wanna drag you down the rabbit hole here because again, it is lightly obfuscated and we don't need to clean this all when we've done that for the Visual Basic script, but this looks like capability to have simple communication in its own obscure protocol or comms. Is this download capability? Do a data with a thing from the configuration likely, replacing .exe again with underscores to try and hide something else. Yeah, okay, it'll start something. So this is totally the at least command and control or RAT, remote access Trojan capability, where it could just stage whatever it wants and then execute it. Let's go see what some of those things are. Because diverted or whatever is supposed to be, ooh, is this just grabbing locations that it might exfiltrate stuff from? I'm curious what that, yeah, like might just be coincidence the variable is randomly named xfwir's exfil windows places. I don't know. Oh, did I get that wrong a moment ago? This is the diverted one that we were just looking at, but down below for Cora, where it pulls a port number out, like for communication, that's in dire. So dire is probably the communication. Ooh. These have 5 different ports then that it's able to probably use or pull from. Mirth IP, that doesn't seem like a real worthwhile IP address though. Is that used? This DNS new byte 34 in decimal is definitely going to end up being likely how this communicates in some way or another. We could just check that in like CyberChef. Let me just drop this into Sublime Text for a quick second so we can massage out. Control A to select everything, Shift Tab to bring back the indentation. I'll hit Control Shift L so we have multiple cursors on each line, and then we could just, hey, select all with whatever Shift Control that we want and pull out each of these. Last element though should have been 56. I just probably want to get rid of the commas and not actually end up removing the last element there. Okay. We can just make this easy in CyberChef. Let me just paste in all of those decimal values, and we want from character code. That should be set to base 10, and delimiter space is fine. Ooh! Q healsec duckdns.org, and that. Okay. So just to guess, that is likely the command and control. A lot of other function names. Oh, and this get8th that we saw previously was to get a directory name from that. Where's that actually stored? Oh, the application executable path. Okay. Ooh, this function is a little persistence. Set RDUP uses the registry, just a current run replace there. So, okay, hiding the underscores again for its weird tiny obfuscation with that, just to break some of the static strings. And then it opens up that subkey to add and create its own location for persistence. That way it'll automatically fire and invoke every time the computer, hey, gets an action. Looking for the other references to that DNS value, it does actually have something to split out the IP address and the domain right there. So that question mark in the middle, we did see that. Yeah, and then we end up using that for TCP Client Connect. Undoubtedly command and control with whatever port that it chose. Wild. Okay, and it'll keep trying each of the 5 ports until it gets a hit. Makes a connection and has established command and control remote access Trojan. There are a couple other of these class objects that we haven't really explored or scrolled through. These aren't super duper interesting. You can see a couple other stuff. Okay, getting computer name, environment username, stuff to, hey, again, do that reconnaissance, enumerate. Sir, why did one we saw was interesting. It looked like it would do stuff based off of the whole desktop. Literally getting what's happening on the screen. I'm assuming that's to, yeah, take a screenshot or, again, monitor and see what's happening on the device. So we don't have to work too hard here. Let me see if I can upload a file to VirusTotal. Let's start with our original sample, the Summer Collection Outfits.xlam. Let's see how many hits that gets, at least to start. 35 out of 67. Yeah, pretty evil. That's pretty neat that there is some data coming back from a lot of other engines that actually dig into the source. The same thing that we did just moments ago. Getting lit up with detections, I do see Crimson in here, which I'm going to agree, I believe that is the Crimson Rat. What we've pulled out and extracted for the .NET assembly, and we could probably see that get loads more hits if we upload that. Actual, like, you know, Xbox icon that we saw here, our assembly.exe. Obviously, okay, 43 out of 73, yep. Backdoor Rat, Crimson, Dropper, Crimson Net. It's the Crimson Rat. That is the remote access Trojan being deployed out with that sample. Pulling back the curtain a little bit, this sample is on Malware Bazaar. I can add a link for that in the video description if you are interested in getting a chance to play with it. It does drill down into some other sweet stuff and actually, hey, clue us in as to where this was submitted and where it came from. So over on Twitter, big shout out to Sathwik Rampraki. I'm sorry, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, my friend. I always get those wrong. But hey, this was the drill down into, yeah, APT 36, Transparent Tribe, APT Advanced Persistent Threat, file that we got to drill down into, Crimson Rat getting fired up here, and the command and control that we saw. Just about everything in line with everything we got to dig into. There is some sweet detail, another intel that came from the SecRite blog. I believe this actually is the exact same author, individual that was tracking this, shared it on Twitter. Looks like it was talking about all the different APTs that we've been seeing in the mix, and alongside Transparent Tribe, using Crimson Rat, just like we have. They drilled down into another sample for side copies work to start, but later on, if I actually control down for our Transparent Tribe, we can see that sample still being used with this exact rendition here. Phishing email ends up sending this Excel with a VBA macro. It does get self-copied and renamed, everything that we saw. The embedded OLE objects are in fact just base64 encoded remote access Trojan Crimson Rats with a decoy Excel document to fire up, display, and show to you. Ultimately using some other ports or whatever other infrastructure being used for command and control, but you saw all of the exact same stuff that we just showcased in the video displayed here. Same exact usage, syntax, and showcase in the VBA macro, and just kind of neat. Looks like when they were drilling down into this, there were only about 7 detections. And this article was released in April, while that sample was seen, shared on Twitter in May, just think May 27th now, and I'm recording, releasing this out and about on like the middle of June. I won't drill down into all this again because I don't want to bore you with, hey, just reading through the article, but I'll, of course, link this in the video description if you're interested, and hey, maybe some of the other samples that they did get to see with a little bit more hardcore, Confuser X in the mix, goodness, other obfuscation work. I do think the decoys idea is pretty sweet, though. That's kind of clever. You gotta give the credit, you gotta give the devil his due, you know? I know we can hate cyber criminals and threat actors, but you gotta respect the craft. So what do you think? Is that worthy APT malware? Is that an advanced persistent threat with Excel macros? I don't know, maybe a decoy little file to pop up and then a .NET assembly with a off-the-shelf Crimson remote access Trojan? You get to be the judge. I'm curious what you think. Let me know in the comments, but please, thank you so much for watching. Hey, do all those YouTube algorithm things like, comment, subscribe. Please give some love to our sponsors, link in the video description. And with that, I'll see you in the next video.